In the heart of a sprawling old city nestled between misty mountains and narrow rivers, a young woman named Illyra wandered aimlessly through winding streets. The late afternoon sun was filtered through thick clouds, casting everything in a quiet, silver light. Her steps were slow, uncertain, as if her feet were seeking something before her mind had caught up. Illyra had always felt like a puzzle piece that never quite fit. Though surrounded by people in the crowded city, bartering merchants, laughing children, and tired workers returning home, she often felt like a ghost drifting past scenes she couldn't enter. This day had been no different, and the weight of her thoughts pressed heavily on her shoulders. Without planning to, she turned down a narrow side street she had never noticed before, even though she'd walked this part of the city many times. The alley was unlike the rest of the urban maze, silent, cobblestoned, with ivy curling up the sides of ancient brick buildings. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying a scent of jasmine and tea leaves. At the end of the alley, almost hidden behind hanging lanterns and creeping vines, was a small wooden door. Above it hung an old sign, its letters faded but still legible, "The Willow Tea House." There was something about it that tugged at Illyra's heart, a strange mix of warmth and yearning. She hesitated only for a moment before pushing the door open. A bell above the doorway gave a soft chime, and the scent of spiced tea enveloped her instantly. The room inside was dimly lit but cozy, filled with the warm glow of paper lanterns and the gentle hum of music that seemed to come from nowhere. Shelves lined with porcelain teapots and small potted herbs gave the space a feeling of timelessness, as though it had existed in this same state for 100 years. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with long silver hair tied in a low knot. He looked up from arranging cups and gave her a nod, his eyes calm and knowing. "Welcome, traveler," he said simply, as though he had been expecting her all along. Illyra blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you," she murmured, moving slowly to sit at one of the small tables near the window. She watched the rain begin to fall softly outside, the droplets catching the lantern light like tiny stars. The tea house seemed entirely cut off from the rest of the world, no sounds of traffic, no voices from outside, only the steady rhythm of the rain and the occasional clink of cups. The man brought her a small teapot with a single flower floating inside. "White chrysanthemum," he explained. "It eases the heart and clears the mind." As Illyra sipped the tea, warmth spread through her chest, not just from the temperature, but something deeper, something almost magical. The sounds around her faded. Her body grew lighter, as though the room itself was breathing with her. Then, without warning, the world shifted. The tea house shimmered, and Illyra found herself in a garden though she hadn't moved at all. Cherry blossoms fluttered from invisible trees, and a gentle wind stirred her hair. Before her stood a child, no older than 6, with a curious smile and familiar eyes. "Illyra," the child said, "do you remember me?" Illyra felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. This was her, a younger version of herself, untouched by sorrow or confusion. "What is this place?" Illyra whispered. The child giggled. "A place between places. A place for remembering." As quickly as it had come, the garden faded, and she was back in the tea house, the flower in her tea now fully bloomed. She glanced at the old man behind the counter, who was wiping a glass with a serene expression. "Did I fall asleep?" she asked. He smiled gently. "You stepped through a door that many walk past but few enter." Illyra didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to question everything, but another part, the deeper part, didn't want to disturb the fragile magic that lingered in the air. As the evening deepened and stars peeked through the clouds, more guests entered the tea house. Some were old, some young, but all moved with a quiet reverence, as if they too carried invisible burdens. They sipped their teas in silence or whispered to each other with soft smiles. Illyra noticed that none of them seemed to notice her, or perhaps they simply accepted her presence as one accepts the arrival of the wind. She sat there for hours, unmoving, lost in the rhythm of time that seemed both still and flowing. Her tea never cooled. The music never changed. And the old man continued to serve each guest with the same calm grace. Eventually, Illyra rose, bowed slightly to the host, for he felt more like a guardian than a mere server, and made her way to the door. "Come back when you're ready," he said softly as she touched the handle. "I think I will," she replied, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. When she stepped out, the alley was empty. The door had vanished. Only the scent of jasmine remained on the wind. And yet, something inside her had shifted. A door had opened, not just in the wall of the city, but in the quiet chambers of her own heart. The days passed slowly after Illyra's visit to the Willow Tea House, though something in her spirit had begun to shift. She no longer wandered the streets with aimless dread. Instead, she found herself revisiting the alleyway every few evenings, hoping to see the little door again. Yet no matter how she searched, the Willow Tea House remained elusive, like a dream too fragile to revisit with open eyes. Back in her apartment, she felt both comforted and unsettled. Comforted by the memory of warmth, of the chrysanthemum tea and the little girl who had spoken in riddles. But unsettled because she couldn't tell if it had really happened. Had she dreamed the entire experience? One evening, she opened a notebook she had stopped writing in months ago. Without thinking, her pen began to move. She wrote down everything: the alley, the tea, the blossoms, the child, the silver-haired host. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. That night, she dreamed of the tea house again. This time, the paper lanterns hung lower, their light flickering with stories she couldn't quite hear. The elderly man stood behind the counter, but beside him now was a young woman in traditional robes, serene, with hair dark as ink and eyes that shimmered like stars. She turned to Illyra and whispered, "There is more you must see." When she awoke, her pillow was damp with tears. The next morning, a letter arrived with no sender, no address. Only her name, Illyra Wynne, inked in graceful calligraphy. Inside, a single card. Even closed doors remember those who knock with an open heart. T. Attached was a pressed white chrysanthemum. Heart pounding, Illyra rushed back to the alley. At first, it was empty. just crumbling walls and ivy and damp stone. But when she closed her eyes and stood very still listening, breathing, remembering a faint breeze rustled by. And with it, the familiar scent of jasmine and spiced tea. She opened her eyes. The wooden door was there. She didn't hesitate. The tea house greeted her like an old friend. This time, the light inside was brighter, and the air hummed with energy. The silver-haired host nodded but said nothing. Illyra stepped further in, and that's when she saw the others. There were 5 guests seated at separate tables, all looking just slightly out of place. A woman in a tattered cloak with eyes full of longing. A man in an old soldier's coat who seemed to carry the weight of centuries. A boy no older than 10, whispering to a bird in his palm. A silent monk with a missing hand. And finally, a young girl curled in a window seat, watching Illyra with tear-stained cheeks. The host gestured for her to sit, but not at a table. Instead, he guided her behind a wooden screen, to a corner where a fire crackled gently in a stone hearth. A scroll hung on the wall, "Memory is not the past. It is the echo of truth." "I see you brought your questions with you," the host said at last. "I have more than questions," Illyra replied, almost in a whisper. "I feel torn. Like a string between 2 worlds." He smiled faintly. "That's because you are." Before she could ask what he meant, he poured her a new tea this time, the leaves unfurled into a dark red flower, unfamiliar to her. "Bloodleaf blossom," he explained. "A tea of trials. It shows not what you want, but what you need." Illyra hesitated, then drank. The moment the warm liquid slid down her throat, the room began to ripple. Shadows lengthened. The fire dimmed. The hum of voices turned into whispers countless, echoing, like wind brushing through ancient trees. She found herself standing in the old home of her childhood, a weathered cottage on a cliffside, waves crashing in the distance. But it was not how she remembered it. The place was broken. Windows shattered. Dust coated everything. Yet the scent of cinnamon lingered, her mother's favorite. And then she saw her, a woman with soft eyes and trembling hands, her mother. Younger than Illyra remembered. Kneeling beside a cradle, crying. Illyra stepped forward instinctively, but no sound escaped her mouth. "This is the moment you were left behind," came the voice of the silver-haired host, disembodied now. "The grief you inherited, but never knew." The scene shifted. A young man, her father, on a ship, facing a storm. A letter in his coat. The words, "I will return," never delivered. Illyra wept. When she opened her eyes again, she was still in the tea house, the fire flickering low. The host stood beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Tea reveals, but it does not repair," he said. "You must walk through what you see." Illyra nodded, her breath shaky but determined. "Then show me more." The host stepped aside, and the young woman in the robes, the one from her dream, entered with a tray of scrolls, each bound with a red string. "These," she said, "are the stories of others who came before you. You will learn from them. But eventually, you must write your own." Illyra stared at the scrolls. She did not yet know how her story would end, but for the first time, she was ready to begin truly living it. The next few days at the edge of the city were cloaked in a subtle anticipation. Illyra no longer drifted through life as a shadow. She had tasted something beyond the veil, not merely memories or magic, but something more intimate, a forgotten belonging. Yet reality, as always, had its own rhythm. Her father, Aldrin Wynne, once a proud merchant with aspirations of grandeur, returned home that week with sorrow carved into the lines of his face. Illyra could read it immediately in his eyes. He had failed. Again. Years ago, Aldrin had placed every coin, every asset, and every hope into a fleet of trading ships that never returned from sea. When they vanished, so too did their privileged life in the heart of the capital, the manor, the household staff, the glittering social circles. What remained was a small weather-worn cottage on the outskirts of the city, once intended as a summer retreat. Now, it was their last refuge. Illyra's siblings, 3 brothers and 2 sisters, responded to their downfall with a blend of denial and entitlement. Valen, the eldest, still wore his faded noble coat-like armor, despite the patches on the sleeves. Malia, the second sister, refused to set foot outside the cottage, claiming the local villagers looked at her like a beggar. The twins, Corin and Cassian, spent their days idling in the garden or scrawling complaints on the walls in chalk. And the youngest brother, timid Lys, often simply hid in the loft. None of them lifted a hand to help. Only Illyra, the youngest of them all, had embraced their new life. Even before the tea house, she had learned to sweep the hearth, patch torn clothing, grow herbs, and mend broken kitchen tiles. And now, after what she had seen, she worked with quiet purpose. She understood something the others could not or would not. This hardship, humbling as it was, had taught her how to live. Each morning, she rose before dawn to fetch water from the creek and knead dough with rough hands. She spoke to the chickens as she scattered grain, tended the garden, and bartered for salt or flour at the village market. The townspeople, who had once looked upon the Wynne family with suspicion, now welcomed her with warm nods and small smiles. She had earned their respect not through words, but through effort. But it was lonely. And still, she carried the weight of that other world of scrolls and spirits, and a door that opened only when the heart was ready. Aldrin, in his grief, spent his days riding between townships, searching for merchants who might offer him a second chance. He returned each evening more weathered, his voice quieter, until even he stopped speaking of dreams. One misty morning, a letter arrived from the harbor. A long-lost ship, the Dusk Rider, had appeared suddenly in port, battered but intact. Its cargo, rich with spices and silks, had somehow survived years lost at sea. The family erupted with excitement. Valen declared it proved that their fortune was finally returning. Malia already spoke of ordering new gowns from the capital. Corin and Cassian made plans to rehire the servants. Even Lys, the most reserved, smiled for the first time in weeks. But Illyra, she said nothing. She looked toward the little herb patch she had grown with her own hands, toward the wicker basket she had woven, and the kitchen where she had learned to cook over a wood fire. There was comfort here. And purpose. She wasn't sure if she wanted to return to marble floors and velvet drapes. That evening, as the stars emerged, Aldrin sat beside the hearth and asked each child what they desired him to bring back from the city. "A golden laid cane," said Valen, "like the ones ambassadors carry. A mirror from the Eastern Kingdom," added Malia, "with dragons carved in the frame. Matching swords." The twins said in unison. "Books," whispered Lys. "About the sea." When it was Illyra's turn, she hesitated. "Just one thing," she said softly. "A rose. Any color." The room fell silent. "A rose." Valen laughed. "We ask for riches and you want a garden weed." "They don't grow here," she replied. "And I've always wanted to see one. Just one." Aldrin nodded, his gaze gentle. "Then a rose you shall have." But even as the family celebrated, packing provisions for their father and dusting off travel coats, Illyra felt the same stirring in her chest, that quiet warning from her dreams. She kissed Aldrin goodbye with a smile, but as he rode into the dawn along the forest path, her heart felt heavy. She remained outside until the trees swallowed his silhouette. The others retreated indoors, talking of future feasts. But Illyra sat alone, whispering to the wind, "Please let him return safely." That night, she dreamed again. But this time, it wasn't of teacups or gardens. It was of a storm. Dark clouds gathered over a jagged coastline. A horse struggled through mud. Lightning flashed over twisted branches. And in the distance, a towering gate of black iron stood wide open. Beyond it, shadows danced not with malice, but with memory. Illyra woke with a start. She didn't know what would come next, but deep inside, she knew, the story was far from over. Aldrin Wynne rode steadily through the morning mist, heart buoyed by the prospect of renewal. The sky above was clear for once, pale blue and endlessly open, and his thoughts were filled with hopeful visions. He imagined rebuilding the fleet, repurchasing their estate, and restoring his children's inheritance. But most of all, he imagined the look on Illyra's face when he placed a fresh rose in her hands. He reached the port by midday, its wharves bustling with activity. The Dusk Rider, though scarred by its long voyage, stood tall among the other ships. Its cargo was largely intact: bolts of silk, crates of cinnamon and cardamom, even a small chest of lapis jewelry. Yet something was wrong. Whispers followed him through the streets. Whispers of debts, of unpaid dues, of promises long forgotten. Word of the ship's return had spread fast, and so too had the scent of opportunity for creditors. By the time Aldrin arrived to claim his share, men in fine coats and sharper words had already seized most of it. He tried to reason. He begged. But in the end, the cargo was gone, stripped to pay off old obligations he had no means to contest. By sunset, Aldrin stood alone at the edge of the docks with nothing but a few coins in his pocket and a heart full of failure. Worse yet, he remembered his children's requests: the jeweled cane, the carved mirror, the twin swords, and Illyra's rose. He wandered the outskirts of the port city as darkness fell, clouds gathering once again. He passed taverns and stables, merchants closing their stalls, and beggars huddled beneath stone arches. It began to drizzle. Just as he was about to find shelter beneath an awning, he spotted a narrow forest path branching away from the main road. At its edge stood a wrought iron gate, partially open, vines curling around its frame like beckoning fingers. Something tugged at him. Beyond the gate was a garden, faintly illuminated by the last light of day. And there beneath a twisted blackthorn tree bloomed a single rose bush. Aldrin stared. The petals were pale gold, tipped with crimson, glowing faintly in the twilight. Remembering Illyra's words, he stepped through the gate and approached the bush. The scent of the rose was intoxicating, richer than any flower he had ever smelled, carrying notes of cinnamon, wine, and rain. Carefully, reverently, he reached out and plucked a single bloom. A terrible roar split the night. The sky darkened in an instant, and a wind howled through the garden. From behind the tree emerged a creature enormous, cloaked in shadow, with glowing eyes and a voice that made the earth tremble. "Who dares steal from my sanctuary?" Aldrin dropped to his knees, the rose clutched to his chest. "I meant no harm," he pleaded. "It was for my daughter. She asked only for a rose." The creature stepped into the light. Its form shifted, now a beast with the body of a lion and the antlers of a stag, now a man cloaked in darkness and gold. His voice was sorrowful and angry all at once. "Many have come to take. Few have asked." "I didn't know," Aldrin whispered. "Please. Take anything from me. I have nothing left but—" "Then give me that," the beast said, pointing to the rose. "Or give me your life." Aldrin clutched the flower closer. "Please, don't punish her for my mistake." The creature was silent for a moment. Then his voice softened. "If your heart truly speaks for hers, then I will offer you a choice." A swirl of wind circled them. The rose floated in the air between them, glowing like a fallen star. "You may return to your home, but in 3 days' time, your daughter must come in your place." "Willingly." "She must walk the forest path and offer herself to the curse you have awakened. Or you shall return instead, and this garden shall become your grave." With that, the creature vanished in a gust of mist, and Aldrin found himself back on the main road, the rose still warm in his hands. He rode through the night without rest. At the cottage, The storm arrived before he did. The family had been gathered by the hearth when the rain began to fall in torrents. Valen paced restlessly. Malia sulked. The twins quarreled over who would get the first turn with their imaginary swords. Only Illyra stood at the window, watching the forest with unease. When her father finally arrived, soaked and shivering, they all rushed out to greet him, but their joy faded when they saw the look in his eyes. He handed Illyra the rose with trembling hands. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then looked at him. "But what did it cost?" Aldrin collapsed by the fire and told them everything. Gasps filled the room. Outrage. Accusations. Tears. Illyra said nothing. She stared at the rose, turning it slowly in her hands. And then she stood. "I'll go." The room fell silent. "No." Aldrin shouted, rising to his feet. "It was my crime. I will pay it." "You said he gave you a choice," she said gently. "And I am choosing. This isn't just about a rose. It's about a promise. One I made with my heart, before I even understood it." None of her siblings could speak. For the first time, they saw her not as the youngest, the quiet one, but as the strongest among them. She turned toward the window, where the storm had begun to fade, and whispered, "Show me the way." At first light, Illyra stood at the edge of the forest path. Dew sparkled on every blade of grass, and mist rolled slowly over the earth like a living veil. She wore a simple cloak, a satchel with bread and dried fruit on her back, and the rose now dried but still glowing faintly pinned near her heart. Her siblings said their goodbyes awkwardly, still stunned by her choice. Valen avoided her eyes. Malia tried to insist she change her mind. Corin and Cassian whispered to each other as if expecting her to turn around. Sweet Liss gave her a necklace he had made from wood and twine. But Aldrin said nothing. He simply held her, then whispered, "I'm sorry." She touched his cheek with gentle fingers and smiled. "You gave me life," she said, "now let me find its meaning." And with that, she turned from them all and walked into the forest. The trees seemed to lean in as she passed, their branches whispering secrets only they remembered. The further she walked, the stranger the forest became. Time bent. The light shifted. Colors grew more vivid, and the silence was broken by sounds that didn't belong: flutes, soft humming, the distant bell of a temple. Birds with shimmering feathers flew in slow spirals above her. A silver fox darted across her path and vanished into mist. At one point, she passed a pond that reflected not her face, but a little girl's, the same dream child she had seen in the tea house. "Not yet," the reflection whispered. "But soon." She reached the blackthorn gate just before dusk. It stood tall and ancient, covered in vines with thorns like obsidian. A key hung from one branch, glowing blue. Illyra took it and unlocked the gate. Beyond it stretched a grand avenue of lanterns and stone arches, crumbling but majestic. The path led to a castle once glorious, now overgrown with ivy and shadows. Towers leaned against each other like tired giants. Gargoyles with weeping eyes guarded the steps. Illyra crossed the threshold. Inside, she found not terror, but silence. Vast halls filled with broken chandeliers and faded murals. Long abandoned ballrooms where dust danced in the shafts of light. And in the center of it all, a solitary figure waiting by the fire. The beast. He stood as she entered. He was taller than any man, cloaked in fur and shadows, with curling antlers and eyes that burned gold. But he did not roar. He did not threaten. "You came," he said simply, voice low as thunder in the distance. "I gave my word," Illyra replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. The beast stepped aside and motioned to the table where bread, stew, and tea were waiting. "No cages here," he said. "Only choice." She sat. He sat across from her. They ate in silence. That night, Illyra was given her own room, vast, with a canopy bed and a window that looked out on an endless forest lit by glowing fungi and moonlight. But she could not sleep. She wandered the castle's halls, guided by an invisible pull. In a gallery of portraits, she found paintings of kings, queens, and children, all bearing faint traces of the beast's features. In the library, ancient books whispered as she passed, their pages fluttering open without wind. One displayed a poem. To break the curse, one must not run, nor flinch from shadow, flame, or sun. To love the truth beneath the beast, and offer trust, ere heart has ceased. She whispered it aloud. Behind her, the beast's voice replied, "You're not the first to read those words, but you may be the last." The next day, the castle revealed more of itself. A music room filled with forgotten melodies. A greenhouse overrun with wild roses. A tower where time stood still. Illyra saw dust floating frozen mid-air until she blinked. Each evening, she dined with the beast. And slowly, words began to fill the silence. He told her stories of the kingdom he once ruled, of the pride that led to a cruel wish, of a curse that turned him and his court into memories and beasts, statues, and silence. Of how every attempt to break the curse ended in heartbreak or betrayal. She listened. And when she asked, "Why me?" he answered, "Because you asked for the smallest thing and carried it like it was everything." On the seventh evening, as twilight bathed the castle in rose light, Illyra stood in the garden. The rose bush had bloomed again, dozens of glowing flowers swaying in the breeze. She touched one gently, and whispered to the wind, "What do you want from me?" A voice not the beast's answered. A voice soft, feminine, ancient. "Not what we want. What you choose." The garden shimmered. And for a moment, Illyra saw them, ghostly shapes walking the paths, children, maids, nobles, cooks all once human, now bound in spirit to the curse. Watching. Waiting. One child stepped forward, her form flickering. Illyra recognized her as the reflection from the pond. "You are the key," the girl said. "But the lock is still hidden." Then the image faded. That night, Illyra asked the beast one final question. "If I stayed forever, what would happen to you?" He stared into the fire. Then replied, "I would remain as I am, until you no longer see me." She nodded slowly. "And if I leave?" "You are free to go. You always were. But the door will close. Forever." She did not sleep that night. By dawn, the castle held its breath. And Illyra with trembling hands and a burning heart walked deeper into the curse. The following days unfolded like pages of a forgotten book. Each one led Illyra deeper into the castle's heart and into the soul of the beast. Though he remained a creature cloaked in shadow, the beast grew less monstrous in her eyes. He no longer towered over her with menace, but walked beside her in silence through the library, the halls, and the endless gardens that seemed to bloom only in her presence. And when they spoke, he answered her questions not with riddles, but with sorrow. It was on the 10th day that Illyra first asked the question neither of them dared touch before. "What was your name, before the curse?" The beast paused. He stood beneath a crumbling arch, where vines curled like script across the stone. "My name was Kalin," he said at last. She repeated it softly. "Kalin. It means chosen flame," he added. "Though in time, I burned more than I warmed." And with that, the visions began. That night, the castle itself showed her its past. She dreamed she was standing in a grand throne room, bathed in gold and glass. Courtiers in velvet lined the walls, music played from hidden balconies, and at the center sat a young man, Kalin, beautiful, proud, and adored. But there was a hardness in his eyes. A hunger. He demanded more than loyalty. He demanded worship. A cloaked woman stood before him, a visitor from a distant land, offering him a gift, a rose that glowed with inner light. "A token of humility," she said. "Of beauty that cannot be possessed." Kalin laughed. "All things can be possessed with the right price." And so he took the rose and threw the rest away. In that instant, a storm tore through the throne room. The woman cast off her cloak, revealing not age or weakness, but power, her hair like river water, her eyes like the night sky. "You have chosen the curse of fire," she said. "And now you will burn in longing until love grows where pride once stood." Illyra woke trembling. She now understood, the rose was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be honored. The next day, she asked Kalin, "Did you ever love anyone, before the curse?" He turned away. I loved the idea of being loved, but not the people who offered it. And now, he looked at her, truly looked, and in that moment, there was no monster in his face. Only the ache of 1,000 lonely nights. I don't know what love is, he said. But I think I'm beginning to see it in you. Later that evening, Illyra found herself drawn to the west wing of the castle, a part she had never dared to enter. The doors opened without sound, and the air grew colder as she passed through. Here, the portraits were all covered with dark cloth, the chandeliers unlit. But at the end of a narrow corridor, she found a spiral staircase leading down into what felt like the earth itself. Torches lit as she descended, as if the castle had been waiting for her. She reached a chamber unlike any other, a circular room with a pool in its center. Above it, a domed ceiling shimmered with constellations, though no light entered from above. In the pool, reflections swirled of people, moments, regrets. A voice echoed. This is the Garden of Echoes. Here dwell the memories of those who came before you. Those who tried. Those who failed. She saw them, flickers of women in different times, each one drawn to Kaelin's sorrow, each one choosing to stay. But none of them stayed for him only for the hope of breaking the curse, of gaining the glory of the tale. None of them ever loved him for who he truly was. And so the curse held. And they vanished. Illyra knelt beside the water, touched its surface and saw herself. But in her reflection, she wore no fear. Only resolve. That night, as thunder rolled over the distant hills, she returned to the great hall where Kaelin waited. I saw them, she said. I know, he replied. They left because they wanted the ending. But they never saw the middle. He nodded. And you, she said gently, never let them. Kaelin closed his eyes. Because I couldn't believe anyone would stay, once they saw the truth. Illyra stepped forward, took his hand, clawed and trembling though it was. I'm still here. The castle pulsed with a low hum. For the first time, Kaelin smiled. Later that night, the winds outside changed. The walls of the castle, once cold and grey, shimmered faintly with life. Somewhere in the eastern wing, a caged bird began to sing a sound no one had heard in centuries. And in the deepest part of the forest, the vines on the blackthorn gate began to bloom. The days passed like falling petals, quiet, gentle, and filled with unspoken transformation. Since the night in the Garden of Echoes, the castle had begun to change in small, quiet ways. Tapestries once faded now shimmered faintly with color. The kitchen's long silence gave off the soft scent of baked bread. Portraits once hidden beneath cloth revealed themselves without fear, and even the grand clock in the west tower, which had stood still for years, began to tick again. But no change was greater than that between Illyra and Kaelin. Where once there had been silence, now there was laughter. In the mornings, they walked the garden paths together, speaking of dreams, regrets, and books. At noon, they play chess by the sunlight in the solarium. Kalin, competitive but fair, Illyra, clever and patient. And in the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes speaking of the world outside, sometimes not speaking at all. Yet in every glance, in every small gesture, the way he pulled out her chair, the way she adjusted the collar of his coat, something deeper began to bloom. And still, the question hung in the air like perfume. Was this love? One morning, Kalin led her to a hidden courtyard she had never seen before. In the center stood a tree, ancient and silver-barked, its branches twisting into the sky like a frozen flame. Around it grew blue roses that pulsed with soft light. This tree, Kalin said, was planted by the woman who cursed me. It blooms only for one who speaks the truth of their heart. He looked at her, then truly looked. I will not ask you to stay. You deserve the world beyond these walls. But if you were to speak, here, beneath these branches, I would know. Illyra stepped forward, her heart pounding. She reached out and touched one of the blue roses. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still, the petals were cold. Kalin turned away, and she saw the flicker of disappointment in his eyes, not in her, but in himself. He walked off, and for the first time since her arrival, left her completely alone. That night, Illyra could not sleep. She walked the hallways in silence, trailing her fingers across cold stone, whispering her own name like a prayer. She loved him. She knew it. But the truth was tangled. Was her love born of gratitude? Of wonder? Of pity for a cursed soul? Or was it real, strong enough to withstand the outside world? She wandered into the music room, where moonlight spilled like liquid silver across the floor. An old harp sat in the corner. She had never played before, but tonight, her fingers moved on their own. A melody sad and soft filled the air. And from the shadows, he watched. Kalin stood at the doorway, unmoving. When the music stopped, he stepped into the light. Tomorrow, he said softly, marks your 30th day. The curse will shift. She turned. Shift. He nodded. If love is not spoken freely by nightfall, the final rose will wilt. And I will remain as I am forever. A long silence passed. Then why wait for me to speak? She asked, her voice shaking. He smiled. Because I believe in your truth more than I believe in the curse. The next day dawned with a strange stillness. The castle was quiet, unnaturally so. The halls no longer whispered. The portraits had turned their faces away. Even the birds in the courtyard had fallen silent. Illyra stood before the silver-barked tree again, her hand outstretched. Still, the petals did not bloom. Time passed. Afternoon faded into dusk. And still no sign. Finally, Kalen appeared, dressed in a dark velvet coat with golden trim, a mirror of the prince he once was. "I will leave you here," he said. "Should your heart speak, the castle will answer." He bowed not as a beast, but as a man. Then turned and vanished into the shadows. Illyra stood alone beneath the branches, the sky above her darkening. She whispered every truth she knew. "I see your sorrow. I see the man beneath the fur. I see the boy who once thought love was something you could own. And finally, I see who I am when I am with you." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I choose you, Kalen. Not because I must. Not because of your curse. But because I would rather face a world of thorns beside you, than a garden alone." She touched the rose once more. It bloomed. Blue turned to white. Then gold. Then scarlet. And the tree shuddered with light. From deep within the castle came the sound of cracking stone, of chains breaking, of voices, long silenced, crying out with joy. She ran. Through the halls, down the stairs, into the great chamber. Kalen was there kneeling, trembling, light pouring from his chest like fire. "Kalen!" she cried. He looked up. His antlers had fallen. His eyes were no longer golden but a deep, warm brown. He reached for her. "Illyra," he whispered. "You spoke." She dropped to her knees beside him, took his face in her hands. "I loved you before I knew it," she said. "And now, I say it aloud." He exhaled, not as a curse, but as a blessing. The castle roared around them. And the final petal fell not with sorrow, but with release. The castle pulsed with newfound life, but beneath the surface, something darker stirred. Though Kalen's true form had been revealed, the curse was far from broken. As dawn broke over the ancient stone towers, Illyra awoke to a chilling silence. The usual morning chorus of birds was gone, and a thick fog curled through the halls like creeping fingers. Kalen was already awake, standing by the window, gazing into the grey mist that blanketed the forest. "Illyra," he said without turning, "the curse has one last trial. A darkness that even love must face." Illyra's heart tightened. "What must I do?" Kalen's gaze met hers, steady and grave. "You must enter the shadow realm." He led her through a hidden door behind the grand library, a spiral staircase descending into depths unknown. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, a cavern opened, walls shimmering with ethereal light, reflecting infinite stars. It was a realm between realms, where the past and future, light and shadow, intertwined. A figure awaited them, a woman cloaked in darkness, her eyes glowing like molten silver. "Welcome, Illyra," she said, voice like the wind before the storm. "I am Morrigan, guardian of the Shadow Realm." Illyra swallowed her fear. I am ready. Morrigan smiled, cruel yet majestic. To break the curse, you must confront your deepest fears, the shadows within yourself and Kaelin. Only by embracing the darkness as well as the light can the spell be undone. The trial began. Illyra found herself in a labyrinth of mirrors, endless reflections distorting and twisting her image. Each reflection whispered doubts. Are you worthy? Do you truly love him? Will you survive? A mirror shattered. A cold hand reached out. Kaelin appeared, but not as the man she knew. His eyes were wild, his roar shaking the glass. Leave me. I am the beast you fear. Illyra stepped forward, grasping his hand. No, she whispered. I see you, all of you. They moved through the maze, facing visions of loss, betrayal, and despair. Shadows clawed at their hearts, memories of pain they had tried to bury. But together, they pressed on. In the heart of the labyrinth, they faced a final vision, a dark throne, empty but waiting. Illyra knelt before it and spoke aloud the vow she carried from the tea house. I accept you, the cursed, the broken, the beautiful. I choose love, not despite the shadows, but because of them. Light exploded around them. Morrigan appeared again, softer now. You have passed the trial. Back in the castle's great hall, dawn was breaking. The curse shattered like glass. Kaelin's fur melted away to reveal a man crowned in silver and gold. The castle bloomed with life, roses erupting in every courtyard. Illyra and Kaelin embraced, two souls freed, bound by love's true power. The first light of dawn spilled like molten gold over the castle's battlements, illuminating every corner of the ancient stronghold reborn. After centuries cloaked in shadow, the walls now pulsed with warmth and life. Roses bloomed in wild profusion along every terrace and corridor, their fragrances mingling with the crisp morning air. Illyra stood beside Kaelin on the highest tower, their fingers intertwined, their gazes cast toward the distant horizon where the dense forest gave way to rolling hills and shimmering rivers. The curse had been broken, but the world beyond awaited, vast, uncertain, and full of promise. Kaelin turned to her, his eyes reflecting the dawn's soft hues. The castle is no longer my prison, Illyra. It is our home. But out there, he gestured toward the sprawling lands, our kingdom lies in ruin. The people suffer, the fields lie fallow, and the trust of the nobles has faded like smoke. Illyra nodded, her heart swelling with resolve. Then we must go. Not as prince and princess, but as healers and leaders. Together. In the days that followed, they prepared for their departure. The once silent halls bustled with activity, servants returned, laughter echoed through the corridors, and musicians tuned their instruments for a celebration long overdue. Illyra found herself learning the intricacies of leadership alongside Kaelin. She pored over ancient scrolls detailing laws and customs, spoke with advisors who had waited centuries for their liege's return, and visited the castle's gardens, planting new seeds as symbols of rebirth. Yet amidst the joyous bustle, uncertainty lingered. The outside world had not waited for them. Neighbors who once pledged loyalty now eyed them with suspicion. The noble houses, fractured and wary, questioned the strength of a prince returned from darkness and the girl who had changed him. Their first journey beyond the castle walls was met with mixed reception. In the village nearest the forest, Illyra walked among the people, listening to their stories of hardship, barren harvests, ravaged lands, and the spread of disease. Children eyed her with curiosity, elders with cautious hope. Callan met with village leaders and knights loyal to old oaths, seeking to rebuild alliances and restore order. His voice, once thunderous and feared, now carried the calm authority of a leader reborn. But even his words could not erase years of neglect and despair overnight. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and rose, Illyra sat alone beneath the silver-barked tree, the same ancient tree from the castle garden that had witnessed her vow. Callan approached silently and sat beside her. "You have changed everything," he said softly. "I was once trapped by my pride, but you showed me humility. Now, I see a kingdom not defined by gold or power, but by the bonds we forge." Illyra smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It is only the beginning. Healing takes time, patience, and sometimes sacrifice." The challenges ahead were daunting. Enemies lurked in shadow, ambitious lords coveting the throne, dark forces stirred in forgotten places, and old fears clung stubbornly to hearts long broken. But Illyra and Callan faced them united, their love, a beacon in the gathering dusk. Together, they planted seeds of hope. They rebuilt shattered bridges, both literal and figurative, and rekindled the spirit of a land yearning for peace. As seasons changed, tales of the beast who became king and the girl who tamed him spread far and wide. Songs were sung by minstrels in taverns, and children dreamed of a rose that could break any curse. Yet Illyra knew their story was not one of fairy tales or endings, but of journeys long, winding, and ever new. And with Callan by her side, she was ready to walk every step. The air was thick with expectation as autumn's chill settled over the kingdom. The once barren fields now held the promise of harvest, but the peace that Illyra and Callan had begun to build felt fragile, like a candle flame flickering in a draught. In the castle's grand hall, courtiers whispered behind gilded fans and heavy curtains. Old alliances strained under the weight of distrust. Ambitious nobles eyed Callan's return as an opportunity, some to pledge loyalty, others to plot his downfall. Illyra moved among them like a practiced diplomat, her presence both calming and commanding. Yet even her steely grace could not quell the undercurrents of conspiracy. One evening, as twilight bled into darkness, a hooded figure slipped through the castle gates, delivering a sealed letter to Illyra's chambers. The wax bore a sigil unknown to her, a serpent entwined around a thorned rose. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was brief. "Beware the serpent's kiss. Not all who smile are friends." Meanwhile, Callan faced his own battles. Trusted advisors began to question his decisions. A faction led by Lord Marwyn, a stern and calculating noble, sought to sway the council against Illyra's influence, labeling her an outsider, a girl from shadows and curses. In a heated council meeting, Marwyn accused Callan of neglecting the realm's defense, while casting doubt on Illyra's loyalty. Illyra stood, voice steady but fierce. "I may be from shadows, but I stand for the light of this kingdom. We are not enemies of the past, we are architects of its future. To deny that is to doom us all." Her words silenced the hall but did not end the dissent. One night, a trusted guard warned Illyra of a planned assassination attempt during the upcoming harvest festival. The conspirators intended to strike when the kingdom celebrated, hoping chaos would mask their treachery. Illyra confided in Callan. Together, they devised a plan to uncover the conspirators and protect their people. During the festival, vibrant banners fluttered and the air was thick with music and laughter. Yet beneath the joyous facade, Illyra and Callan moved like shadows, watching, listening, waiting. A masked assassin slipped through the crowd, blade glinting under lantern light. Illyra's hand flew to her dagger, intercepting the attack just as it was about to reach Callan. A fierce struggle erupted in the midst of revelry, drawing gasps and cries. The assassin was unmasked, a young noblewoman, eyes wild with desperation. "I do what I must to save my family," she spat, defiance burning in her gaze. Illyra lowered her dagger, compassion flooding her heart. "Then help us save everyone," she said gently. The assassination attempt exposed the deep fissures in the kingdom. More nobles revealed their true colors, and Illyra realized that healing the realm would require more than kindness. It demanded wisdom, courage, and sacrifice. Amidst the turmoil, Illyra and Callan's bond deepened. They found solace in quiet moments beneath the silver-barked tree, whispering promises and plans for a future forged in hope and resilience. Yet the serpent's kiss lingered, a reminder that shadows never fully vanish. The castle that once echoed with joyous celebration now hummed with tense anticipation. The aftershocks of the assassination attempt rippled through the court like a dark tide, threatening to drown the fragile peace Illyra and Callan had so painstakingly woven. The council chambers became a battlefield where words cut deeper than swords. Lord Marwyn, emboldened by the chaos, rallied the discontented nobles, pressing for Illyra's exile and questioning Callan's capacity to rule. "Illyra is a stranger to our traditions," Marwyn declared, voice cold and commanding. "She is a shadow that blinds the king's judgment." Callan rose, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Illyra has been the light that brought me back from darkness. To question her loyalty is to question the very foundation of this kingdom's renewal." The chamber erupted into shouts, alliances fractured, and threats whispered like poison in the corners. It was clear that the struggle for power was far from over. Behind closed doors, Illyra grappled with the weight of leadership. Letters from border villages spoke of unrest, rumors of mercenary bands gathering in the wilderness. The people's hope flickered precariously, and she knew that strength alone would not suffice. She sought counsel from the castle's oldest advisor, Malus, a woman of quiet wisdom whose eyes seemed to hold the memories of ages. "Your strength is not in steel or words alone, Illyra," Malus advised. It lies in knowing when to hold fast and when to bend like the willow. Illyra pondered this, realizing that her greatest challenge was not the enemies without but the fears within, the fear of failure, of losing Callan, of losing herself. One stormy night, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A traitor among their ranks had been discovered, conspiring to overthrow Callan and place a puppet ruler on the throne. Illyra convened a secret council with her most trusted allies. The traitor's identity was unknown, but clues pointed to a noble of high standing, someone with access to the inner chambers and Callan's trust. The tension was suffocating. Every glance, every whispered conversation could mask deceit. Meanwhile, Callan struggled with his own doubts. The curse had left scars deeper than the visible ones, shadows that stirred in moments of weakness. He confided in Illyra one night beneath the silver-barked tree. "I fear the man I was," he confessed, voice heavy. "That the beast still lives within, waiting for a moment to rise." Illyra took his hand firmly. "You are not your past, Callan. You are the man who stands here now, and I see the courage in your heart." Their bond was their anchor in the storm. The search for the traitor led to an unexpected discovery. Lord Marwyn himself had been playing a dangerous game, weaving webs of lies and manipulation. When confronted, Marwyn's facade cracked. In a desperate bid for power, he unleashed a curse, a shadowy magic that spread through the castle like a creeping vine, draining strength, and sowing discord. Illyra and Callan faced the greatest test yet. United, they delved into ancient texts and rituals, seeking a way to sever the dark magic. In the depths of the castle's forgotten crypts, Illyra found a relic, a thorned crown said to possess the power to absorb curses. With Callan's blessing, she placed the crown upon her head, feeling a surge of pain and power intertwine. The shadow magic recoiled, the castle brightened, and the traitor's influence shattered like glass. But the crown's power came at a cost. Illyra's own vitality waned, her strength fading with each passing day. As the court celebrated their victory, Callan vowed to protect Illyra and the kingdom, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Illyra, determined and fierce, whispered back, "We face this together or not at all." The air in the castle was thick with both anticipation and a fragile hope. Illyra's strength had been waning steadily since donning the thorned crown, each day a battle between light and shadow raging within her. Yet her resolve remained unshaken for Callan, for the kingdom, and for the love they had forged through fire and darkness. Callan watched her with a fierce tenderness, his eyes shadowed with worry and unyielding devotion. "You carry the fate of us all, Illyra," he whispered one evening as they stood beneath the silver-barked tree, now blooming with roses of every hue, a living testament to their journey. "And you carry mine," she replied, placing her hand over his heart. "We are bound beyond curses, beyond crowns." The final trial awaited them in the ancient chamber of the ancestors, a vast hall deep beneath the castle, where the echoes of the past whispered secrets on the cold stone walls. It was here that the curse had begun, and it was here that it must end. Illyra, wearing the thorned crown that pulsed faintly with both agony and power, led Callan through the shadowed corridors. They were accompanied by Malus and their most loyal allies, a small circle of hope amidst the darkness closing in. In the heart of the chamber, an altar carved from black obsidian stood, etched with runes of binding and release. As Illyra approached, the crown's pain flared fiercely, a searing reminder that magic demanded sacrifice. She placed the crown upon the altar, whispering words learned from the oldest texts, incantations that called upon love's true essence and the strength of forgiveness. Suddenly, the chamber trembled. Shadows gathered and writhed, forming monstrous shapes, the embodiment of the curse itself. The beasts of past failures, of fear, of pride, emerged to challenge them one last time. Callan stepped forward, his voice a roar of defiance and hope. This curse has ruled too long. We cast it out with the light of our hearts. Illyra's hand found his, and together they faced the darkness, their love shining like a beacon, breaking through the swirling night. The shadows screamed and shattered, dissolving into petals of light that swirled upward, transforming into a radiant rose, the very symbol of their journey. The thorned crown cracked and crumbled to dust. Illyra collapsed into Callan's arms, exhaustion flooding her. Yet as she looked into his eyes, she saw not despair but a promise of new beginnings. The castle, freed from centuries of shadow, blossomed with life. The kingdom began to heal under their reign, and stories of the beast and the girl who loved him spread as legends of courage and redemption. Illyra and Callan walked hand in hand through gardens filled with roses, each one a reminder that love, tested and true, could transform even the darkest curses into light. Years later, beneath the silver-barked tree, children played and sang. The castle's halls echoed with laughter and music once more. And in the heart of the garden, a single golden rose bloomed eternal and bright, a testament to a love that changed a kingdom forever. Title: The Thorned Rose, a tale of love, curse, and redemption. Description: In a kingdom shrouded by a centuries-old curse, Illyra, a brave and compassionate young woman, steps into a world of shadows and secrets when she encounters Callan, a prince bound by a beastly curse. Together, they embark on a perilous journey through enchanted forests, ancient trials, and political intrigue, discovering that true love is not just a promise, but a powerful force capable of breaking even the darkest magic. Amidst betrayal, sacrifice, and growing danger, Illyra and Callan must confront their deepest fears and forge a new future, proving that from pain and thorns, the most radiant roses bloom.